So, hello. And I kind of feel we're having a really intimate meeting here tonight, and it's great because I'm going to. I'm Jackie. You'll see and hear a bit more about me, but and this is Aris.
Aris, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So this is my husband. I'm his wife. He's Cuban. I'm English, and I speak English and Spanish, and so does Aris, to a very limited degree. The Spanish is fine. The English is limited, but he understands quite a lot. So, and I just first of all want to really thank you for coming and being here and being interested enough. And just to give you a bit of background on how come we're talking about Cuba and Palestine. There's lots of people talk about Cuba, lots of people talk about Palestine. How come we're talking about the two together? Well, last December, Alice and I went to spend the best part of 3 months in the winter in Cuba. And we arrived there on the 11th of December. And on the 17th of December, if you remember, was the day that Raúl Castro, President of Cuba, and Barack Obama, President of the US, made their announcement that they were going to resume diplomatic relations. So that was just 6 days after we got there. And what I started noticing was that there were a lot of people that we were talking to, tourists primarily. Oh, this is all going to change, and isn't this exciting? And they were mostly not the Cubans who were saying, isn't this exciting? And the Cubans were, yeah, okay, this is interesting. We didn't expect that to happen in 2014. Most people we spoke to didn't expect that to happen in 2014. And given that there's, an economic blockade exercised by the US and actually impeding trade that other countries, third countries, have with Cuba as well, we were curious as to how that was going to develop. And the blockade is still in place. So then there was the issue of Cuba being designated and still being on the list of the state sponsors of terrorism. And that categorization, that determination of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism has now been eliminated, but only from the 29th of April. So Congress had 45 days, the US Congress had 45 days to say if they were going to block Cuba being taken from the taken off that list, and no one blocked it. So that was by default, they are no longer on the list of state sponsors of terrorism. And people have been asking us, have they got, are they going to have McDonald's in Havana? And, when do you expect the first Costa Cafe to open? And things like this, And really understandable questions. But in amongst this, we had previously been here at the Palestinian Museum for a film called What Hope Peace. I don't know if you can remember it, Carrie Ann Mendoza, who, and she'd been in Gaza last summer. And we came to see that film, and it occurred to us both that there were lots of similarities, and just maybe that heightened awareness, because then while we were in Cuba, we were there until the beginning of March this time. And the 10th of March, I think we came back. And when we were listening to the news. Now, there were lots of visitors from the US Congress, the US senators, different Americans who were arriving in Cuba. And I was aware of certain things that I thought, oh, I didn't expect that. And on the 2nd of March, and I make reference in, we've got quite a few slides, and part of the reason we've actually selected some textual comments, some transcribed them, because I don't want to interpret things. There's a lot of people interpreting things. So it's like, here's some facts. You interpret them. You know, if you want to interpret them, you do that. We're presenting them. And obviously, Aris has a Cuban perspective on things. He's explained lots of things to me that I didn't or don't understand. During the time while we were in Cuba, I decided, actually, there's a reason I'm here. I shouldn't be wasting this time. I'm going to write a book. So I during that time, I've since completed it, but the book's called Cuba, One Moment in Time. And it's precisely a capture of what's going on right now. And maybe it was because I had, that on my mind. I was, we listened to the news, we heard who was having meetings in the US, in Cuba. Excuse me. And one thing I noticed, really struck me, is on the 2nd of March, the Cuban foreign minister was speaking to the Human Rights Council. He was addressing the Human Rights Council. And as part of that speech, when he could have been saying any number of things about Cuba and, we should be taken off the terrorist state sponsors of terrorism list, we should have the blockade ended, he could have been demanding all sorts of things. But one thing he did demand, or did express in that, was a call for recognition of Palestine as a state. And, that was quite striking given what they could be dealing with in Cuba. And yet there was still this commitment to the revolutionary principles of solidarity. And so that's how all this started, in a sense. Looking at, and because after we saw that on the 2nd of March, we came up with the idea that we'd go and we'd see if we could we only had a few days left, a week left, but we'd see if we could make a visit and meet with the Palestinian ambassador in Havana. So we did, and he was delighted to meet us, and some of what we, obviously he offered us a certain orientation in terms of things to look for, things to be aware of in the solidarity between Cuba and Palestine. So that gives you a kind of broad background. Aris got something to say. He's gonna. So what do you say? See. Yeah. Okay. So the introduction was too long. So let's get on with it then. Right, so I've got my little crib sheet. But what I'm going to do is we will go through this. And this just says a bit about who we are. So hello. Aris's background is in the healthcare in Cuba. Mine is and he was also doing some lecturing in the university in his field, and I was a Spanish university lecturer, so my Spanish has resulted in his English, probably to a large degree, so we communicate in Spanish. But anyway, one of the things he's worked or studied in USSR in Angola and has been over here, frequent visits. We live together in whatever country it makes sense to live together in. So we've been in Cuba. I was translating for the Granma newspaper in Cuba. We're over here, or we're in Spain. So that gives us a bit of a background about us. And the intention is to kind of have our winters in Cuba and summers in over here. Can't think of anything better myself. And that's another thing. Thank you for being here on a nice evening. So this is the Cuban foreign minister, as I mentioned. This was the Human Rights Council, the 2nd of March. And what he said was, we support the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to a state of their own on the pre-1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as their capital. The United Nations General Assembly should action with resolve and guarantee without further delay the full membership of Palestine, the supply of weapons and the veto in the Security Council which ensure the impunity of the crimes committed by Israel, particularly in Gaza, should come to an end. That was part of what he said on the 2nd of March. And we have got it on the screen, and I am going to read it as well, because some people like to read, some people like to hear it. And there are various extracts, as I said, rather than interpreting or summarising where we focus on something or another, we preferred to present it as it was. So this was, and obviously it's an extract. His speech was much longer and he talked about other things, but that was one thing he spoke about. So this was us with Mr. Akram Mohammed Salman. And I probably said that wrong, and I apologise to anyone, but he's the ambassador, Palestinian ambassador in Cuba, so we went to see him. And we started looking at how are they similar? Look at how are they similar? Well, similar population. Cuba has 11 million, Palestine has 12. Many Cubans are abroad, and in different countries, a lot in the US, and according to the information we've got, about half the Palestinians are outside their home territory, and then the foreign power both have in common that a foreign power occupies part of their home territory. So in Cuba, obviously that's Guantanamo. I'm sure you'll understand that although we're including, we're looking at Cuba and Palestine, some of you may know much more, are likely to know much more about Palestine than we do. We've looked at, what kind of the shared commitments and how Cuba has expressed over decades its solidarity with the Palestinian cause. So that is the main focus. One of the other things that they have in common is that in the US they have what they call the Cuban Adjustment Act, and that's actually stimulated a lot of migration, and by allowing Cubans to go to America with very much enhanced conditions which are not available to many other immigrants. One could clearly analyse why the US might be interested in doing that, but that's not something I'm going to go into right now. Yeah, go on.
Bueno,
Let's just have a check. Who speaks Spanish? Who speaks Spanish? I know some of you speak Spanish. Rita, you do.
A little bit.
And you do, Neva, don't you?
Tiny bit.
Tiny bit, okay. And you speak a little bit. So some people speak a little bit of Spanish. So.
ya, yo voy a explicar despacio y tú vas a traducir.
And I'm going to translate anyway.
En este punto que se está hablando de la inmigración cubana y se afirma y se sabe que la inmigración cubana en Estados Unidos es grande. La migración cubana hacia Estados Unidos no empezó con la Revolución Cubana. Ya desde antes de la Revolución Cubana había una fuerte cantidad de migrantes en los Estados Unidos.
Yeah.
Incluso antes del siglo XX.
Yeah, right. So point one made is that although we say that a lot of the migration has been political, but previous to the 1st of January 59, which was when the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, previous to that, even in the 19th century, there was a lot of Cuban migration to what is now the US, but of course, you know, the exchange between Florida particularly.
Entonces,
Which is why we've got economic, that Florida, Europe, Latin America and Africa, it's like part of the movement.
pues la revolución emancipadora, la gesta emancipadora de Cuba, del pueblo cubano, comenzó para emancipar al pueblo y el territorio cubano de la colonización española. Esa guerra empezó en el año 1968 y ya desde entonces había un fuerte grupo de cubanos viviendo en el exterior. Cuando se ve en la historia de Cuba el capítulo de la preparación de la guerra necesaria, la última etapa de la guerra, los últimos 10 años de la guerra que culminó en el año 1998, José Martí, líder de la época y hasta la actualidad de la nación cubana, organizó en Estados Unidos la guerra para la liberación de Cuba.
Right. Okay, so
No te entiendas.
no. Excuse me. So, what Aris was explaining there was the movement was because obviously in the 19th century Cuba was still under Spanish colonial rule, and so Florida was part of the Spanish territory, which is partly why there was movement between Florida and Cuba as well. And in 1868, that was when the War of Independence, if you like, in Cuba started. And then that went on for 30 years. So there was that was the armed struggle for independence. It went on for 30 years. And the last 10 years of it was when José Martí emerged as the kind of philosophical motivation for the revolution and for independence. And in the last 10 years, he actually lived outside Cuba most of the time, but was organising independence activities from outside Cuba. So, and of course, Cuba gained independence in 1898 from Spain, but we're going to come back to that.
Entonces, ¿qué sucede ahora que se habla de la inmigración cubana y los medios que están en manos de los intereses políticos hablan de que los cubanos estamos escapando de Cuba y que la población cubana que vive en Cuba son los cubanos que no pueden vivir en Cuba por el régimen de los Castro?
Lo que sale de Cuba, ¿no?
Sí.
Yeah, that's actually another thing, and it's something that I'm very interested in. So, one of the things that's often said is that Cubans, like the press, which is serving political ends primarily, is you know, and I don't want to go into interpretations, but that's like we all know that the press serves the interests of the people who are paying for it. And what has happened in Cuba is the way the press has presented it. It's like any Cuban who leaves is an escapee. Right, so someone like Aris would be an escapee because the they would have you believe that Cubans can't leave, which isn't true. Alice isn't an escapee. He comes here, he goes back. He comes here, he goes back. I do the same, you know, in the same way. And that's one of the things that has been generated. Now, it is true in the past that Cubans used to have permission to travel from, you know, partly to protect against the brain drain, free education and then being lured over to the US. But that's no longer the case. And I have seen articles written in the US, possibly translated from America or just written, which talk about Cuban escapees, as if everyone wants to get off the island, and the only reason they don't leave is because they can't, which is by far the case. You know, not the case. That's just not the case. Okay. Anything else?
Okay. Debemos decir que en este periodo revolucionario del año 65, Estados Unidos implantó, 1965, implantó la llamada Ley de Ajuste Cubano, que estimula la inmigración ilegal.
Okay.
El que inmigra ilegalmente es recibido con manos abiertas, beneficios económicos.
So the Cuban Adjustment Act was clearly, you know, if any of you read what President Obama said in December, he actually made it very clear, I can't remember the exact words, that their policy, the US policy towards Cuba had not worked. And had not worked because they had a clear intention, which was to bring about the downfall of the regime. They didn't manage it in 56 years. And so we're going to try a new tack. But they tried an awful lot of things in the meantime. And one of the things was the Cuban Adjustment Act. So that was introduced in 1965. And as Alice has just pointed out, it was actually to stimulate illegal immigration. So you know, if people were willing to come in illegally, we'll welcome them with the arms open. And of course, they served as potential mascots, I suppose. You know, oh, look, all these people have come in on balsas. What do you think? Like live rafts, because there was some of that going on. Okay, so if we look at some other things, so some other things, and actually I should have highlighted there the thing that you probably all know, but obviously about Palestine. Oh, this is frozen there, very good. So many European countries have encouraged Palestinians, the Christian Palestinians, to emigrate. That was something that would have involved a smaller number, obviously. So if we go on to the next slide. Right, common between Cuba and Palestine. Both have been subject to international legal determinations made outside the territory, which have an impact internally. Both have received the support of the majority of United Nations members, with the repeated exception of the US and Israel. Both have suffered violations of their rights under agreed UN charters, and both have large numbers of their people living in the neighbouring territories, which are responsible for the hostilities. So, we'll be seeing the level at which the Cuba-Palestine solidarity has been extended, the time over which it's been extended. But as a recognition of that, in 2012, we have a mouse that's not moving forward. Right, okay, so we have here in Havana a bust of Yasser Arafat, and this is the ambassador unveiling it. And what he says there is, in the end, the force of law will prevail over the law of force. And that was, that was as relevant to Cuba as to well, not as relevant, that's actually underrating it, but undermining it. But, the law of force has been used in Palestine, and it's been used differently, but has also been used in Cuba. But, there's a commitment that will shift. So, this was something else here, Cuba and Palestine, taking part in manifestations, demonstrations. This was a march in 2014, that was September the 2nd, 2014, that was published in the Granma newspaper in Cuba. And I don't know if you can see, but obviously here you've got Fidel Castro, and here you've got Nicolás Maduro from Venezuela. You were saying something about Chavez.
I was saying that when Chavez died, one of the Palestinian representatives said that Chavez had done more for the Palestinian people than any other Arab country, because Venezuela offered free residency to any Palestinian that could get there.
Right.
There's a solidarity act.
Yeah, and of course, Cuba and Venezuela are sister countries and share a commitment. So that was one photo, and then another one that actually we saw the commitment of, there's obviously some very evocative posters or banners there, but of course then, while you might not have recognised Fidel and Nicolás Maduro, I'm sure you recognise this chap. So it's still iconic. If you're in Cuba, you see him everywhere, but he's now a Cuban export. We actually have a song that I'd like to put on. ¿Tú quieres buscar y que no? Y yo les puedo decir la letra. And YouTube. So we've got a song that actually was clearly written by a Cuban artist, made with an animated film, which Aris is going to dale cabe primero Aris. And there's a song which was an anti-war song that came out in, I think, 2004 about the war in Iraq. But we've watched it, and particularly in relation to Gaza. So what I'd like to do is be able to show you that on YouTube, because it's on YouTube. But in case you don't understand Spanish, I'm going to give you a quick run through. You might get the words, but I'm going to give you a quick run through the words. Okay? So I've been seeing for a long time that this world is upside down. People pay the price of life with their blood. Children cry because the hungry have no way out, and they die under the fire of the promised land. The rich dividing up the planet with guns, white supremacy at gunpoint, attacking bastions, religions and prophets in the name of peace with machine guns. And they're televising what happens. They're carrying the hate to the corners of your home. They're making a show out of abuse and killing. They're measuring the criminal rating of revenge. The rating, like the TV rating. Or measuring the ratings out of the criminality of revenge. Now that the world has changed, that the murderers love people. Now that they are attacking children with smarter bombs. Now that blood is shed in the name of peace. Now that there is friendly fire. Now that the TV tells us that all the poor are enemies. Say no, war cannot continue. Say no, children should not die. Say no, no to war, brother. Joining hands, we can dream of the future. I thought it was my Nintendo that I was seeing on my Panda TV screen, with people dying, a native person crying, and a president lying. War was starting. I saw a couple of bombs dropping, a continent protesting, police repressing. Stock market reeling and oil prices rising. I saw a terrorist enjoying himself and 5 young people suffering, a whole people fighting but another people dying. And that child's eyes that the troops have killed for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now that the world has changed, that the murderers love people, now that they're attacking children with smarter bombs, now that blood is shed in the name of peace, now there is friendly fire, now that the telly tells us that the poor are the enemies. Say no, war cannot continue. Say no, children should not die. Say no, no to war, brother. Joining hands, we can dream of the future. Conventions and treaties. Conventions and treaties that they have flushed down the toilets. Committees seeking but not finding. Divided opinion. A whole people threatened. In front of the TV. Saturated by ballot slips bought and sold in bundles by manipulating opinions. The cowboy daddy's boy who bought the elections of all that BS that I've had it up to my, and the rest is the courts. So we're just going to watch this. Dale pantalla completa. Aris, dale pantalla completa.
Hace tiempo que estoy viendo que este mundo está patas para arriba. La gente paga con su sangre el precio de la vida. Los niños lloran porque el hambriento no tiene salida y mueren bajo el fuego de la tierra prometida. Los ricos dividiendo cañonazos el planeta con la supremacía blanca punta de escopeta, atacando bastiones, religiones y profetas en nombre de una paz con metralleta. Y están televisando lo que pasa, están llevando el odio a los rincones de mi casa, están haciendo un show con el abuso y la matanza, están pidiendo el rating criminal de la venganza.
Ahora que el mundo ha cambiado, que los asesinos tienen la mente. Ahora que están atacando a los niños con bombas más inteligentes. Ahora que corre la sangre en nombre de la paz. Ahora que hay fuego amigo. Ahora que dice la fe que todos los pobres somos enemigos.
Di que no,
La guerra no puede seguir.
di que no,
Los niños no deben morir.
di que no,
No